A Russian drone attack on Odessa injured 8 people and damaged homes, a medical facility and a warehouse, according to regional officials. Moreover, separate Russian strikes on the northeastern region of Kharkiv killed 4 elderly residents. Meanwhile, Russia has said that its missiles hit a meeting of Ukrainian army commanders in Sumy, accusing Ukraine of using civilians as a human shield, after Kyiv said the attack on Sunday killed at least 34 people in one of the deadliest strikes of the entire war. Russia's defense ministry said its army launched 2 ballistic Iskander-M missiles at the place of a meeting of command staff, claiming that it had killed 60 Ukrainian soldiers. The Kremlin rejected that its army had targeted civilians or that there had been any kind of mistake. Russia's attack drew condemnation and accusations of war crimes from leaders around the world. US President Donald Trump, who is pushing for a ceasefire, called it a horrible thing and suggested Russia has made a mistake. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer also said that he was appalled, and his Italian counterpart Giorgia Meloni called it cowardly. Germany's Chancellor-in-Waiting, Friedrich Merz, on Sunday described the attack as a serious war crime, deliberate and intended. On the other hand, the Kremlin criticised Germany's Chancellor-in-Waiting, Friedrich Merz, on Monday over comments suggesting Germany might send Taurus long-range missiles to Ukraine. The strike on Sumy came less than 48 hours after Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff held talks with Putin in St. Petersburg. The Kremlin on Monday called the meeting extremely helpful and very effective, without elaborating on the discussions. Well, joining us to discuss these developments is Keith Vaz, former British minister, who's joining us from Goa. Keith, thank you very much for taking some time out to speak with us today. There are detailed Russian claims on this strike, which, if we believe Ukrainian officials, has killed 34 people, injuring dozens more. With this contradictory statement, where do you think the reality lies in this situation?
I think people are genuinely shocked that this has happened. There was a brief statement made by President Trump, who said even he was shocked by the attack that was made on Sumy. However, he stopped short of saying, he said it was a mistake, but he didn't say who had told him it was a mistake. And certainly the Russians are not saying it was a mistake. But this is the largest number of civilians that have been killed in Ukraine in this way since 2023. So what's happened in Sumy is a very serious state of affairs, and it flies in the face of the attempts that are being made by the Trump administration through Steve Witkoff and Keith Kellogg to try and bring the sides together. What's also very clear is that those diplomatic initiatives that are going on are not bearing fruit. Russia is refusing, in a very real sense, to sit at a table with Ukraine to try and resolve this matter. So it must be frustrating the Trump administration. If people can remember back, I know it seems like a year, but it was actually only a few weeks, when President Zelensky went to the White House. The tables have turned since then. When he was being blamed, now it seems for the first time that the American administration is accepting that the Russians are deliberately dragging their heels. While they are dragging their heels, they now control 18.9% Ukraine. And it has galvanized European leaders, such as the Chancellor-elect Merz and the 40 nations that met together in Brussels, to provide Ukraine with even more resources to try and deal with this problem. I think a total of 24 billion has been pledged at the conference that was held this week in Brussels.
Yes, Keith, I want to bring up a point you made about that meeting between Witkoff and Putin. What message does this send from Russia that if this attack is true and so many civilians have been killed, one of the worst attacks on civilians since the war started, what message is Russia sending so soon after a meeting with a top US diplomat?
The message is that they don't really care what's being done. Their aim is to take as much territory as possible before the ceasefire takes effect. Their aim is to make sure that they proceed. There is now evidence that there are Chinese soldiers who are working with the Ukrainians They've been captured by the Ukrainians, sorry, by the Russians. They're working with the Russians, not the Ukrainians. They've been captured by the Ukrainians. And I think China now has serious questions to ask, to answer about what exactly is happening. So from that point of view, I think it's really important that we see these dramatic developments over the last week, which are clearly causing a lot of concern to President Zelensky, who has done a 360 turn and said he's prepared to have negotiations, but he is not prepared in those circumstances to be able to have decisions taken from him. So these are all very serious consequences. As I've said before to you, Josh, Sergei Lavrov has been foreign minister for years and years, 2 decades. President Putin has been in power for over 2 decades. They are very wily operators, and they are not just going to come to the conference table unless they get as much territory as possible, and sadly, unless they kill as many people as possible, which seems to be going on now. They seem to be oblivious to the bloodshed that's occurring. As we speak, this is continuing. And that is why it is absolutely vital that the ceasefire talks started in Saudi Arabia are continued. Everyone is brought to the table together. If President Trump wants to do something really positive, he should be bringing people to the table and making sure that all 3 parties are able to sit at a table and come to a ceasefire agreement. Otherwise, this will go on. Just finally, Josh, on the questions that have been raised by Keith Kellogg, the special envoy, he, of course, this week suggested that it's quite possible to divide Ukraine as we divided Berlin. He walked back from that statement, but that's a very, very serious statement from a senior American official, that you could actually divide a country, 20% of whose territory has been conquered by another country. So these are serious questions now, and there really does need to be some answers to them.
Yes, Keith Vaz, unfortunately we are out of time in this instance.